In this video, we are going to learn about pivot points, how to customize them, and finally, how to use pivot points for mirroring your objects in Maya. So I'm going to create a default cube, and when I create this, you can see that it forms right at the center of the Maya grid, and it also has a pivot point right at the center of the object. So the pivot point is where the object moves from. So if I rotate this, you can see that it is rotating from the center of this object. And you can easily set the pivot to the center, even if you change the scale, size, you model on the object. You can set the pivot back to the center by going to Modify and Center Pivot. But in a lot of cases, you don't want the pivot to be at the center. And in this case, you have to create a custom pivot to be able to move the object from a certain direction. I'm going to create, let's say, a door. And when you have a door, you need the door to open from the hinges. It does not open from the center of the object, but from the hinges. In this case, you would want to move this pivot point to the hinges. And there's no option in the menus to do that, but you can access an object's pivot by hitting D on the keyboard. And when you hit D, you see that your pivot point changes. So it looks like this. And when you get that, you can just move this anywhere. So you can use the arrow keys to move it, and you can place it where you need to, but I like to use the alignment tool. So if you hover over a face, an edge, or a vertex, you can align this to that location. So I'm going to hit this face right here, and the pivot point will move to the center of that particular face. And then I can hit D again to go back to seeing the regular pivot. And now when I move this, I'm able to move the object. Whenever I create a custom pivot, I always make sure to double click on the Move, Rotate, and Scale tools and reset the tool. So I double click, reset. This is because otherwise your custom pivot will apply to every object that you try to move, rotate, and scale, but you just want it to apply to this object. So once you reset those tools, you can now move that object from that pivot location. And you can change this at any time. You can also place this pivot point on another object. So if I select this object, hit D to get that pivot, I can also align it to the faces, edges, and vertices of another object. And now this object moves from this location. And you can use this to mirror objects in a certain way. Let's look at mirroring an object across another object. So let's create a cube here, and let's create something that we can mirror. So let's duplicate this and place a cube on the other side. And if we want to mirror this, we can select this object and go to Mesh, Mirror, set your axis. So this is going to mirror across the Z-axis. Set cut geometry to off, and your axis position can remain the same for now. So it mirrors perfectly across the object, but this is only when that object is at the center of your grid. Now, if I move this object, so let's say we have an object all the way over here, somewhere else, not at the center of the grid, and I do the exact same thing, you are not going to get a perfect mirror. Your mirror will be all the way on the other side. In this case, we want to make sure to set a custom pivot point so that it mirrors across that point. So I will undo my mirror, and let's select this object. So right now the pivot of this object is at the center, but we want to mirror it across this object that's at the center. So in this case, we will hit D and move the pivot point to anywhere at the center of this edge or at the center of this face where it is, we can clearly mirror across this. So now the pivot point is at the center of this other object. I'm going to reset my tools, and I am then going to try mirroring again. So now I have the pivot point set correctly, and I can go to mesh and mirror and set the cut geometry to off, and the axis we want to mirror across is C, goes over there. But in this case, we can set our axis position to object because we've set a custom pivot on the object. And now when you set that location, it is going to be mirroring across that, and you get a perfect mirror. So this is for objects that do not need to merge together. So these are still two separate objects. They are not attached in any way. You can even separate them by going up to mesh and separate and make them two separate meshes. But for an object that you need to actually merge, you need the vertices to merge at the center. I'm going to create this, and let's try some sculpting on this object. So I'm going to go to object mode, sculpting, and let's sculpt something. So let's say I sculpt something here, and once I do that, I want to mirror whatever's on the side. So I'm going to delete all my center faces so that I can mirror this. And let's delete that. Once I delete that, I have a perfect half of this object and I can mirror across this. One thing that is very important when you are mirroring objects that you want to merge is that this edge loops, the part, all of these edges that you want to merge at the center, they need to be completely straight. So if I go to my front view, let's actually right view, you can see that these are not completely straight. They are in like a wavy line. So if they're not straight, this won't merge correctly. So when we're trying to attach that, we hit R on the keyboard. And when you hit R, you can, if you scale towards the gizmo, if you scale towards the gizmo in the direction that you want these to be in a straight line, it will straighten out all those edges and you'll get a straight line there. Once you do that, you can set your custom pivot, and we wanted to mirror across this straightened edge that we created, so we hit D and we set that custom pivot. It can be anywhere on any of these edges and you'll be fine. And once I do that, as always, I will reset my tools so that I don't get any weird transformations. Once I do that, I click on mesh and mirror, and I set my axis. So this is across the Z axis. My position is set to object, and I set the cut geometry to off. When you're doing this, these vertices will merge automatically. Your merge threshold is important, so Maya will set that a good threshold for you automatically, but sometimes you have to change this. You can even type in a number here if required, but whenever you're changing this, make sure that the merge threshold is not 0. Anything above 0 should work fine, and now you can see that these vertices at the center are merged, and you have a perfectly mirrored object. One last thing about pivot points is that you want to, if you want to move objects in a certain way, like let's say we create this cube and we set a pivot. Let's set it back to those hinges. So if we want to move these from the hinges and reset this. Now, if I rotate this object, you can see that my rotate tool is pointing towards the direction the object is pointing. My scale tool is also pointing towards the direction the object is pointing. But if I go to my move tool, instead of these arrows pointing in the direction of the object, it is in the direction of the grid. So the grid is pointing in this way and that way, and this move tool is in the direction of the grid. And sometimes you may not want that. If you want to move the object in this direction, this move tool is not really helping you do that. In this case, we can change the pivot orientation. You could set a custom pivot, but an easier way to do this is to double click on the move tool to get the settings, and You'll notice that your axis orientation is set to world for the move tool. And if I double click on the rotate or the scale, it is set to object. So the rotate and scale by default are set to be in the direction of the object, but the move tool by default is set to be in the direction of the world. So to edit this, you can just click on this drop down next to axis orientation and set this to object. Object and world are both useful in different instances, but you can see now that I changed this to object, I can move this in the direction that it is facing.